Welcome back to Behind the Caution Tape. I'm your host, CrashLit, and today I am super excited to be joined by former NBC Sports and Fox Sports producer David Neal, who has won 35 Emmys and a Peabody Award. David, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the show. I'm really excited to have you.
Glad to be here, Crash. Anybody who can wear caution tape, I think, is worth spending time with.
I'll take that as a compliment. And now I kind of want to just get into your career. But before I ask you about that, I want to ask you what chose you to go to USC, as you are an alum. You graduated in 1978, if I got that correct.
That's right, yeah. I applied three different schools. I applied to SC, to UCLA, and to William & Mary. And I wanted to be a journalism major. I knew that's what I wanted to do. And both UCLA and William & Mary only had English majors for journalism. They didn't have a school like we had with Annenberg. So it really made it a pretty easy decision. And really, once I started going to classes and going to football games and stuff, I knew that I made the right decision.
And then also your father was a NBC News correspondent and producer and executive. So how did his kind of career influence your decision to study journalism?
Without a doubt, it was the single most important influence. I'm the youngest of two. My brother is about 3 years younger than I am, so I really got a lot of the early exposure to my dad's career, his world. He had been in LA since 1955. He opened the NBC News Bureau in Los Angeles way back when being anywhere west of the Mississippi was considered, being over the other side of the world practically. So my dad was NBC through and through, and television through and through, and journalism through and through. So that influenced me to the point where when I was a senior at SC, I knew I really wanted to get into the business that he was in. He tried his hardest to talk me out of it because he knew what a capricious industry it is. How you can be on top of the world one minute and down looking up at everybody else the next minute. But once he was convinced that I really wanted to do it, then he gave me his full support and insight and encouragement. And so when I was a senior at SC, I had two job offers. I had the weekend sports anchor at the CBS affiliate in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And the other job offer I had was to be a PA, an entry-level job at NBC Sports in New York. So my 22-year-old ego felt that I owed it to America to be in front of the camera, that that's what I needed to do. But with some talking from my dad and other colleagues, I realized that I had the opportunity to start my career at the network level, not at a local affiliate, and that most people in the business were striving to make it to the network. And I had the opportunity to start it there. So that's what made my decision. And in September of 1978, I went to New York and took over as a young entry-level PA. And
then, so you talked about kind of wanting to be in front of the camera, but how did you kind of realize you enjoyed kind of, being on the producing side of things?
I think, when I was at Annenberg, I did some producing, but I did a lot of on-camera work, and I felt confident about it because I felt like I'd done it even back in 1978. Annenberg had a real good program of hands-on production where you used camera equipment, you used edit facilities that are far less sophisticated than they are now, of course. But I felt like I knew how to be on camera. I knew how to tell a story. I wasn't as confident in my ability to produce something, to work with raw material and cut together video and sound and all that stuff. So once I got to NBC in New York, they had a very good program for entry-level employees. And you just learn the basics of tape editing. At that time, we still had film too, so film editing. And it was a hard first year or so because all the things I thought I knew, I really didn't know that well.
And then how did you find yourself, building confidence, especially after, that first year, which you said was kind of tough, but then after, you kind of got your feet wet, kind of got, more comfortable doing that kind of stuff. How do you feel you kind of were able to, grow and, continue to, I guess, improve on like your skills as a producer?
I first felt like I was actually making some progress and doing things well when a producer named Don McGuire, who was producer of the NCAA tournament, the basketball pregame, halftime, and postgame shows. NBC back in 1978, we still were the home of the NCAA tournament, the Final Four. So Don got me assigned to his shows, his pregame, halftime, and postgame shows, which were hosted by Bryant Gumbel. And that was another great thing for me to be exposed to a talent as substantial as Bryant. So that first tournament came and went, and I did enough things right without creating a disaster or having the show go to black or whatever. I felt like, okay, maybe I'm actually doing something right here. And that was my first real validation.
And then obviously you spent 30 years at NBC Sports. So talk to me about just like what that whole experience was like, given that, you were just there for so long.
Yeah, it's interesting because the business can be fairly transient. Then as now, you can be in a job one day and the next day you're sending your resume tape around to people. But the coincidence is my dad was at NBC News for 37 years. So they were just sort of in the family, almost a legacy of staying with the company. I went through a lot of different bosses. My first real boss, Don McGuire, I mentioned, was obviously my direct boss, but the first head of NBC Sports when I got there was a legendary figure named Don Ohlmeyer. Don Ohlmeyer was a Notre Dame guy, but I managed to respect him anyway. Don Ohlmeyer went on to create all the dominant prime time shows for NBC. So Cheers, Hill Street Blues, Friends, all those became something called must-see TV. That was all Don Ohlmeyer as a primetime executive, but he was my first boss at NBC Sports. Then my boss after that was Mike Weissman. My boss after that was Dick Ebersol, who's also a really legendary figure in the business. And then when I went to Fox, I had two more legends. David Hill, the Australian who basically created Fox Sports, created the First and 10 line, the glowing hockey puck, all those sort of innovations. And then Eric Shanks was my last direct boss at Fox Sports. So I worked with some really dynamic people who are legendary. And I was able to be smart enough to just go into the absorption mode, just soak up every bit of knowledge and instinct and creativity from those guys that I could.
And then also immediately after you left NBC Sports, you founded your own producing company. What was that like, kind of, having that sort of that entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, it was rolling the dice for sure. I grew up in the Valley, and when I moved to New York to go to work for NBC in 1978, I'd never been to New York before. So it literally was a complete cultural and physical change to go to LA or from LA to New York. And fast forward some 25 years, 30 years, when my career at NBC was winding down, it wound down because I wanted desperately to go to LA. And my wife finally said to me, ever since we got married, all I've ever heard from you is you want to go back to LA. Well, it's either go to LA or stop talking about it. So I figured, well, I better start my own company then, because nobody's asking me to come to LA right now. So my wife, with her full support, we moved to LA. Shortly after I founded my production company, luckily my agent at the time, and still is there, was working at William Morris, which is now part of the Endeavor, the monolith, which is probably the dominant agency still in show business. So my agent, we talked through a strategy, and I said, look, I've done everything I could do in sports television. What I like to do now is award shows. I like to do what they call shiny black floor shows, with big musical components and video components, whether it's doing the Oscars or the Golden Globes or what have you, New Year's Eve shows, those kind of things. That's what I really wanted to do. And there's a guy who I got to know because of the opening ceremony at the Atlanta Olympics and then later at the Salt Lake City Olympics. A guy named Don Mischer. He was running his own company. He was producing things like the Academy Awards, like the Kennedy Center Honors, the Golden Globes. So Don took me under his wing when I moved to LA. And the very first show I worked on post NBC Sports was the Primetime Emmy Awards for 2010. It was Jimmy Fallon, his first time as host of that show. And so I really got a hands-on taste for that side of the business. And I loved it because there are a lot of parallels between a live awards show and a live sports show. You don't know what's going to happen. That's the nature of being live. You've got to be able to react, to whether it's somebody making an incredible catch on the field of play, or some actor getting in the face of another actor at the award show because they don't like what they had said about him in the press. You got to be live and able to react. So that was going well. And then I got an offer from a friend that I used to know at the NBA, who had just been named the CEO of the Professional Bull Riders. And he said, we need to make over everything about our sport. We think there's great potential here, but the television has not been doing what we needed to do. Would you be interested in taking over the television? And at first I thought, no, I don't want to go back to sports. I want to stay in award shows. I want to stay in entertainment. But I took a look at what the PBR was and what it could be. And make a long story short, I signed up to do it, took that on starting in the year 2011. And it's the one thing that keeps me from being fully retired right now, because now going into year 13, almost 14 of that relationship between me and the PBR. We're still going strong. Crash, I'll tell you, when I started out with my production company covering the professional bull riding, a good audience number in a given week was about 40,000 viewers. They're about as niche as you could be. We are now, some 13 years later, we are averaging on our shows on CBS, we're averaging over 2 million viewers a show. So we've grown it from here to here. And it's an eclectic show. It's not for everyone, but the people who give it a try seem to stay and get involved in some fairly significant numbers.
And I now want to ask you about your stint with Univision,
Yeah,
Univision Vision before you went to Fox Sports, because that seems like kind of where when you got to Fox, you really kind of were really involved in like their coverage of like international football. So kind of how was that kind of helped you kind of what'd you kind of learn on that job, especially when you kind of really dipped your toes in really doing a lot of soccer.
yeah, the Univision job is a perfect example of how it's not just exclusive to our business, to media. This certainly applies to all other businesses as well, but relationships are so key. I was brought on board at Univision by a man named Randy Falco, who was the CEO, he's the president of the NBC television network, the CEO of NBC Sports while I was there. And I became someone that he relied on and trusted. So when he left NBC, he went first to Time Warner, but then he quickly got recruited to come over and run all of Univision. And he didn't speak much Spanish. I spoke about as much as I got in the LA City Unified School District. That's about how much my Spanish was. But it didn't matter. I got there and I realized that you only had to speak television. You didn't have to speak perfect Spanish. I mean, I could get by with enough to order a coffee in the commissary, but it didn't matter. In the control rooms, they were 90% of the directions being given were in English. So it really was something I didn't expect. It was something that I really loved. And I would probably still be there now if Fox hadn't offered me the World Cup job. And you're right to say when the World Cup job came along, I knew that I would benefit from the full immersion in soccer that I got at Univision, because there was an old saying at Univision Deportes, Univision Sports, that says the 5 most important sports to our audience are football, 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 and boxing. So Univision is all about soccer. And Crash, you're right. I got a fully immersive exposure to it and to what drives the passion of the viewers, both in English and in Spanish language.
And then you talked about how you probably wouldn't have left Univision if Fox hadn't called. So what drew you to that opportunity at Fox to, really oversee their production of all the FIFA World Cups for the men and the women, as well as just all the other big international football events that happen that are in Fox's media?
Yeah, some of it was just timing. When I was at Univision, we were the incumbent rights holders for the Spanish language TV rights in the U.S. While I was there, we lost it to Telemundo, who was owned by NBC. And at the same time, ESPN got outbid by Fox for the English language rights. So frankly, it was me recognizing that Fox was asking me to come in. David Hill, the legendary figure I mentioned a few minutes ago, he said to me in a meeting that we had, he said, look, at Fox Sports, we do football better than anybody. We do baseball better than anybody. We do NASCAR better than anybody. But we don't have a clue how to do a global sports event. And he said, that's where you come in, because you ran the Olympics. And he's right. I ran 9 Olympics at NBC, and there's a certain skill set that comes with doing an international sporting event that you have to be a diplomat. My dear friend Bob Costas said that one of the strengths that I always brought to an Olympics was my sense of diplomacy, of recognizing that even though the U.S. rights holder is always the dominant one in terms of money spent on rights and other things, viewership, that there are still some 170, 180 other countries who've also paid for those rights. And just because you're the American rights holder doesn't mean you can come in and pound your fist on the table and expect to get everything your way. You have to be a diplomat. You have to, yeah, oh, there's my puppy speaking here. So I knew that they would be transferable skills that I had from the Olympics at NBC that I could transfer those over to Fox. And again, having the endorsement of David Hill saying he needed me to create a global sports culture at Fox Sports, that was really appealing.
And then so I really liked how you just talked about kind of just producing all that stuff. What were some of your favorite moments from, being like running all those different World Cups and like over the years with Fox?
What I will always remember is the first World Cup that we did. It was 2015. It was the Women's World Cup in Canada. The U.S. women had not won the World Cup in 16 years. It had been since Brandy Chastain buried a penalty kick in the Rose Bowl in 1999 and tore off her jersey and just celebrated a great memorable moment. That was the last time the U.S. women had won, and they had really bitterly been defeated 4 years prior to our World Cup in Canada. They lost to Japan at a World Cup that was in Germany. They lost in the final moments of the game. Going into the 2015 World Cup, we knew the United States women's team was going to be extremely potent. We had Abby Wambach near the end of her career. We had Carly Lloyd in the ascendancy of her career. We had Hope Solo, probably the greatest women's goalie to ever play the game. We knew we had a loaded team, but we also knew that nothing was a sure thing. So there was an extremely strong marketing campaign that was created for the Women's World Cup. And the whole idea was they had 2 stars on their jersey, the way all World Cup winning teams have. They have stars representing a World Cup that they've won. So the U.S. women had 2 on there. And there was this memorable scene and part of the marketing program where Alex Morgan looked at the camera and said, "See that first star? That was from such and such a way back when. See, the second star is from 1999. See the third star? You don't see it? Just wait." So it created a buzz, and we got incredible games. We got the U.S. winning some real squeakers at the end of time, both in the group stage and then once they got to the knockout rounds, we had some games go into extra time. And when it all finished with the final, with U.S. a rematch, a perfect rematch, U.S. versus Japan, who had broken their hearts 4 years previous in Germany. It turned out that we got a rating of 28.5 million viewers for the final, far and away the most watched soccer game in U.S. television history, regardless of gender. Most watched game, more than any men's game, more than any women's game. It was magical. So I will never forget that. I'm proudest of that of my 13 years at Fox. That's the one moment I'm most proud of.
Do you have any other rewarding moments from your time at Fox, whether they're soccer or otherwise?
Well, the luxury that I had at Fox, unlike at NBC, where I was the executive producer of everything for 5 years. And you couldn't just focus on one thing. At Fox, I just focused on soccer. So the 2019 Women's World Cup final, where the U.S. team repeated in France, that was a great memory. I'm just really proud of the on-air talent that Carly Lloyd, who I mentioned before, Carly Lloyd is now one of the leading game and studio commentators in the sport. And I'm really proud of the fact that she came in during my oversight of soccer. A lot of the production people who are going to be working on the World Cup next year are people that came from my group. So I'm proud of everything I did there, but particularly the way that we advanced the coverage of the women's U.S. national team. I'm really proud of that because I think that they had been overlooked. And let's face it, they are far more accomplished than the men have been ever. And I expect them to they had a little hiccup in Australia, the women did, at the most recent Women's World Cup, but they are strong again, and I think that they will come back with a vengeance in 2027.
One thing you were talking about that really made me just think, was just kind of over these past, like, especially in the last few years with like, women's basketball, but then also just other women's sports too. You're just seeing like a lot of growth and a lot more interest in women's sports. So how is it, being like a producer, kind of being, on the inside and just kind of, seeing either just the potential for growth in women's sports and then to actually, seeing just like the ratings and just people just starting to just buy into it, just be like, you know what, I'm going to turn on this women's game for basketball or soccer or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it's really gratifying to see it. There's the Juju, of course, who's she's a phenomenon. There's Caitlin Clark, who arguably is the leader of the resurgence right now. And it's really my wife. Full disclosure, my wife was a scholarship basketball player at Georgetown, so I sort of have it built in at home that I'm going to pay more attention to women's sports. And my wife is from Iowa too, which is where Caitlin Clark is from. So I've got two factors that work there. But it really is gratifying and rewarding to see the women's game, various games, various sports, to see women's games being given so much prominence, and to your point, Crash, to see the viewership respond. And what really was a great thing this past weekend was that there was a game that ABC and ESPN wanted on their air, and it ended up being on CBS as a national broadcast, and it was a rematch of Caitlin Clark and her Indiana Fever versus the Chicago, what do they call
The
it?
Chicago Sky and Angel
Ah,
Reese.
exactly right. And that number, even though Caitlin is hurt and she's out for another week or so, that game came in as the eighth most watched WNBA game ever. So it's more than just Caitlin Clark. It's more than just Juju Watkins. It's the sport itself and the compelling stories that the players have.
Yeah, it's definitely been fun to see it, especially just with having graduated from USC and just seeing the last 2 years with USC and Juju Watkins has been a ton of fun. So it's just really great to see it. And it was really cool to kind of hear what you had to say about that, David.
Yeah, well, I think the various general managers in the WNBA can't wait to see when Juju declares for the draft. If they can only imagine how great it would be to have her on their roster.
Absolutely. And now I kind of want to come back to some of your just accomplishments as a producer, both at NBC and Fox. Just what was it like to win all those Emmys and then a Peabody Award for just all the work you done, whether it was, your documentaries or just your, just live TV that you produced?
It's it's great to get sort of reinforcement that what you're doing is connecting with people. One of the Emmys that I'm proudest of was I was producing the NBA on NBC in 1998, Michael Jordan's last year with the Bulls. When Michael Jordan, his last year with the Bulls, hit that jump shot from the top of the key to knock off Utah in Utah and secure the sixth championship for the Bulls. That moment was the most watched NBA Finals in history. And it's in the mid 20s of numbers. Nobody's ever going to come close to that again. So the only one that got close to it in the ensuing years after that was the time Steph Curry and LeBron James faced off in the NBA Finals about 8, 9 years ago. It was Cleveland and Golden State, and they didn't even break 20 as a number. So I feel pretty good that the most watched NBA Finals of all time is going to be the one that I did. And I feel extremely fortunate to have been in the TV truck, working with people that I trusted and people who had enormous and incredible talent to be able to capture those moments. So I did that. There was a lot of hype about Freddie Freeman hitting that walk-off grand slam in the World Series last December, and a lot of people remembered, correctly so, that it was very reminiscent of Kirk Gibson in the 1988 World Series, where he hit a walk-off in the first game one, in the ninth inning of game one. Well, in 1988, I was a tape producer doing the pregame show, and that was at Dodger Stadium that night. And so when Kirk Gibson hit the home run to walk it off, I took my edit team to an edit's room in NBC Studios in Burbank, and we did a show opening that showed that Kirk Gibson's home run matched almost scene to scene, shot to shot. It matched the home run of Robert Redford's character in the film The Natural, even to the fact that Robert Redford and Kirk Gibson both were left-handed hitters. So we did that, and that was my first Emmy Award, was for that show opening, the intercut Redford in The Natural and Kirk Gibson from the actual event that happened.
That's really cool. And then I also want to ask you about what was it like to, put together that documentary on, Muhammad Ali, which also won an Emmy.
It was, and I was fortunate enough I got to meet him because we got him to do a brief interview with us for that documentary. It was really, it's the kind of thing I wouldn't do now 20 years later because I was young and foolish back then. Now I'm too cautious, but it was going to, at the time was called Zaire. It is now the Republic of the Congo again, and it was going to the site of the Rumble in the Jungle, where Ali knocked off George Foreman in the 8th round. And this was at a time when George Foreman was just dominant, and people were convinced that Ali was over the hill. So we went to Zaire with 3 people: myself, Dr. Ferdy Pacheco, who was known as the fight doctor. He was Ali's corner man for almost the entire span of his career, and a camera guy named Terry Stewart. And so we were on the ground in Zaire for 3 days, shooting on camera, shooting the stadium where the fight had happened, all sorts of things. And the last night that we were there, we were done shooting. We were due on an 8 a.m. flight to Switzerland the next morning. My phone kept ringing all night, incessantly. My phone kept ringing in the hotel. And I'd answer the phone, and there'd be an accented English voice on the other end saying, "Mr. Neal, you need to come to the lobby and pay us a photography fee. You have to pay a rights fee." And so I'd say, "Sure, I'll be right down," and then hang up. And the next morning, I warned that Ferdy and Terry, our shooter, that we needed to get out fast, not talk to anybody, just get out fast. And one of the most euphoric moments I've ever felt was when that Swiss Air jetliner taxied to the runway and the landing gear got off the ground, and I knew that we were safely out of Zaire and headed back to Europe, because word had gotten around just quickly enough that American television was here, and they were looking to shake us down a little bit, but luckily we got out before that happened.
And then kind of off camera, like what was Muhammad Ali like, since you mentioned that you got to briefly chat with him?
Yeah, when I met with him, he was fairly far along in his Parkinson's disease, and he that was doubled up by being punch drunk, which just means too many blows to the head, basically. So he couldn't really speak at length, but I showed him a clip that we had from the first show, which also won an Emmy, the Ali, before the weekend where he became Ali. So the first Ali documentary that we won an Emmy Award for was going back and recreating the first fight where Muhammad Ali basically became Muhammad Ali, is where Cassius Clay, which was his given name, beat Sonny Liston in Miami. And that became a legendary moment as well. But we put together a lot of clips from that build up to that fight, where Ali first did the float like a butterfly, sting like a bee, all the rumble, young man, rumble, ain't Sonny Liston ugly, all these things. We put them together in a clip reel, and we showed them to Ali, and we shot with our camera. We shot him looking at this clip reel, and so he kind of watched himself for 3 minutes doing all his stuff so clever that was always just improvised off the top of his brain. And he finished watching the reel. And he said in sort of a low voice, he said, "Man, I was crazy." It was so good. It was just so good. And he was crazy, crazy brilliant.
I love that. That's such a great story. And then you're obviously now retired. You stepped down after the 2023 Women's World Cup from your position at Fox Sports. But in addition to still kind of being involved with the PBR, what else are you up to these days now?
Well, I'm appearing on Crash's show. It's a regular booking that I have on Crash's show. I'm writing a book.
Oh, that's
And
exciting.
the angle I'm trying to take on it, Crash, and being actually encouraged by Dan Durbin, who's on the Annenberg faculty. I'm trying to take the angle. My dad started writing a book before he passed away some 10 years ago. And it started with his experiences as a reporter just back from World War II. He went on the air with the first NBC, first with the NBC affiliate in Philadelphia, where he's from, and then he moved out to California, as we mentioned earlier. So I'm trying to incorporate my dad's experiences in early television and then sort of intertwining them with my experiences in the sort of next generation of television. So it's sort of a literary device that I'm hoping will make it stand out from all the other books that there are about television sports out there. We'll see. But that's taking up a good portion of my time right
When is it scheduled to be released, or are you still just in the works of it, not sure exactly like what your plan is with it yet?
now. Yeah, still in the works. I would hope to get it, if it comes together the way I expect it to, I'd hope to get it out sometime next year.
Yeah, I'll definitely look for it when it comes out, and definitely would be one of your first people to buy it.
Oh, good.
So
I need to get
so
booked.
please keep me posted on when it's out.
Well,
I'll
actually,
definitely read it.
you got to book me on your show to promote the book.
All right, we can talk about that when it's out. And then I do want to now ask you about just how TV's going these days with, kind of, I guess you could argue in this kind of transition period as, more and more live sports are starting, go on to go from linear TV into streaming. So kind of where do you see TV going in the next 5 to 10 years? Is it still going to be linear? Is it going to be all primarily streaming? I'm really interested, especially with just how, even though it fell apart with how the Pac-12's media rights negotiations went, where they were, really trying to, really trying to go almost went all in with Apple before, obviously Washington said no on that.
Right. I do think the future is digital for sure. But I think there's a huge caveat about that. Digital is the platform that I think will continue to be dominant. But I think that there will be sufficient pressure on rights holders to make the biggest events, whether it's the Super Bowl, the World Cup, the Olympics. There'll be some pressure, fairly substantial pressure on them to make those big events still broadly available to the American public, because there's enough publicly funded infrastructure that supports the television medium that to then say to 20% of the lowest income earning families in the United States, to say, well, we're using your tax dollars to support this infrastructure, but sorry, you can't watch the Super Bowl because you don't have enough money in your budget to pay for a subscription. I just think the pressure will always be there to, at least in the very biggest events, to make them available to the public at large without a fee.
I definitely found that really interesting, especially just how it's going. And I mean, now you're seeing the Pac-12 as it reforms, having to really figure out it seems like they're valuing exposure, especially, when they agreed, at least for these 2 years, to partner with their media rights with the
Right.
CW. So it's just really interesting to hear you talk about just how kind of what's the drawbacks of it. And I think that was something I remember Kalen DeBoer said he was against with Washington doing, is potentially limits recruits' abilities to, see his team on TV.
Yeah, it definitely does. There's got to be some compromise found, some middle ground found, because you can look at it from lots of different perspectives and you can make a compelling case from all of those perspectives. But at a certain point, you've got to be serving the vast majority of people. You just have to do. If you disenfranchise people, eventually it's going to hurt the sport. It's going to hurt the athletes.
All right, so I got a couple more questions for you, David, just as just kind of like where you are now, like in your career. What's the best advice you've ever gotten throughout your career?
It's been my mantra since I first started working for Don McGuire and Don Olmeyer. Give viewers a reason to care. We talk a lot about storytelling, about whether it's on the Olympic Games, World Cup, or the PBR. Any show that I'm involved in, we make it point number one to make sure that we give viewers a backstory on these athletes. Give them a reason to care. Assume that Don Omar used to say, don't give your viewers too much credit. Assume that they know nothing, basically. And by doing that, it gives Michael Phelps, before he went to the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, Michael Phelps was semi-famous, but there are still a lot of people in those hundreds of millions of viewers who watched us on NBC who didn't know that he was going after a record that had never been broken. Mark Spitz had set it back in 1972 in Munich at the Summer Olympics there. To win 8 gold medals in a single tournament was mind-blowing and completely unprecedented. But we didn't assume that people knew that. we in between our profiles unit and our marketing unit, we beat the drum on that story every day and every night. And in the leading up to the Olympics, where it was on the Tonight Show, the Today Show, whatever, we're talking about Michael Phelps, and it meant bringing him to life, bringing who he was onto the screen to give viewers a reason, because you can't just count on saying, well, viewers will watch this because they want to see the Americans win. That's true, they want to see the Americans win, but that's good for a number here. If you want to really set records, you got to get them involved in the individual athletes, and that takes it from here to here. And that's what Michael Phelps, the perfect example of somebody who people kind of knew, but until we really focused in on him and gave his backstory, gave his challenges that he had faced to get to the place where he was going to be poised and eventually would win the 8 gold medals in Beijing. That was all about giving viewers a reason to care. And so to me, it's applicable to any sport that I've ever been involved in. And honestly, it's applicable to award shows. You could argue that the reason the Academy Awards do so well when they do is because it's a Titanic, a movie like Titanic that everybody cares about and they want to see it win, that kind of thing. So it's really applicable across the board. Storytelling, give viewers a reason to care.
And then my final question for you today is, what's the best advice to anyone who they see David Neal and they want to do sports, they want to produce sports TV? What's your advice to them?
First of all, never say no. So if somebody asks you, can you be a stage manager? Absolutely, I can be a stage manager. Can you edit together a story? Absolutely, I can do it. It doesn't matter if you can't. You'll learn it. Just get the opportunity to do it. Always say yes. Always say yes that you can do something, that you will do something. And honestly, Crash, don't ever let yourself get outworked. That was one thing that's kind of, particularly in my first few years at NBC, one of the reasons I think that I got some pretty fortunate assignments on the Larry Bird Magic Johnson game or the World Series with Kirk Gibson or what have you, is because I had a reputation of working my tail off, and that people knew that it meant being in an edit room at 3 a.m. that I'd be there if that's what was necessary. So just never get outworked.
All right, David Neal, thank you so much for coming on Behind the Caution Tape. It was so great to hear from a Trojan great about just your career and just some of your just favorite moments from your time working in sports behind the camera. So thank you so much for joining us today. That's gonna do it.
Right
That's gonna
on.
fight on. That's gonna do it for us here on Behind the Caution Tape. Big thank you to David Neal. I'll see you guys all on the Monday rundown. Be sure to follow me at CrashLit and fight on.